This story follows the life of a high school student named Haruki, who is constantly bullied by some of his classmates. His dark and tormented life suddenly changes drastically when a beautiful new student who has just transferred to their school approaches him and offers him something unexpected. A transfer student has just arrived at his new school. He seems enthusiastic and excited about his new school, which isn't as large as the one in Tokyo. He's walking through the hallways trying to find his new classroom. However, as he passes the biology room, he seems to spot something interesting. In the biology classroom, a soaked student named Haruki is seen being bullied by 3 other students. A girl named Riona sits on top of Haruki to restrain him. At the same time, a student named Takagi is recording the situation with his cell phone. Another student named Orihara is holding a book titled All the Torture in the World, while also holding a bottle of water. Orihara guides his 2 friends to torture Haruki this time by simultaneously pouring water into Haruki's mouth and nose. Of course, this action makes the victim start to feel short of breath. The feeling of being threatened also makes Haruki fear death. These bullies knew that their actions hurt Haruki, but what they expected from the young man was that he would try harder so he could entertain them in his boredom at school. Haruki, who was short of breath, tried to breathe, but the water that began to enter his lungs made him cough and vomit the water that was forcibly infused earlier, which hit Riona, who was still on top of Haruki. Riona felt disgusted, but on the other hand, she also wanted to do something crazy. Riona wanted to know if they could still do it without having to pin down Haruki. Takagi wasn't sure because Haruki refused. Because of this, Takagi raised his fist and hit Haruki. The blow made Haruki bleed from his nose. The 3 bullies looked happy when they saw Haruki's nose bleed. They immediately immortalized Haruki's pitiful look. Just as they were about to repeat their actions, the transfer student who came saw and caught them red-handed. The young man offered himself to be strangled. Riona and her 2 friends didn't understand what the boy meant at all, but instead of an explanation, all they got from him was the name of a fool. The bullies were furious. Takagi immediately wanted to beat up the transfer student, but Riona stopped him, saying they shouldn't just hit their juniors. With good intentions, Riona stroked the transfer student's head and advised him to return to his class. However, the young man, unexpectedly, displayed an irritated expression and told the girl not to touch him. The transfer student didn't hold back and even insulted the 3 bullies implicitly by saying that there was something strange with 6 legs or more, and had 2 tongues, and that made him hate lowly people so much. Riona didn't understand the meaning of the words, while Takagi thought the transfer student was a stupid figure, because surely everyone would also hate the figure that the transfer student had just described. The transfer student suddenly took out a handkerchief and dipped it in the aquarium so that the handkerchief became completely wet. The bullies were surprised and did not know what the transfer student was doing. Takagi then did not stay silent and tried to pull the young man's hand. The transfer student was silent, but a moment later, he caught Takagi and covered his mouth with the wet handkerchief while saying that what he did to Orihara was an example of the right way to torture. Slowly, Takagi began to feel short of breath, and at the same time, Riona tried to warn the transfer student to let go of Orihara. Just as they were about to start causing a commotion, from outside the biology room, a silhouette of a teacher was seen pacing the hallway while saying a name as if he was looking for someone. Seeing the situation was dire, the bullies tried to escape from the situation so as not to be caught by the teacher outside the biology room. However, before they left the room, they gave a warning to the transfer student that if they ever met, they would not hesitate to send him to God, the young man. The biology room was silent, only Haruki and the beauty student were left. Haruki thanked the young man because he thought he had helped Haruki get out of his bad situation. Haruki was cleaning up the mess in the room while the transfer student asked him why he shouldn't try to fight back, because there were actually so many ways to escape the bullying situation. Haruki just stayed silent. Seeing that his question seemed like it wouldn't get an answer, the transfer student chose to leave Haruki in the room alone. But before actually leaving the room, Haruki said that even with fish, the situation will still be the same. Those who are the weakest will have a habit of attacking with small objects. The 3 people refused to stop Bull. Ying, even if Haruki tried to stop them, the consequence that would arise was that someone else would become the target of the 3 people's bullying. If that were the case, the bullying would never end. A person can never be at peace if they feel intimidated. These thoughts led Haruki to resign himself to being a victim of bullying. The transfer student was stunned by Haruki's explanation. A smile appeared on the handsome young man's lips. Haruki then returned to his class, and with his appearance still messy, there were many of his classmates wondered what had just happened to Haruki. Haruki's face looked messy while his clothes were still soaked. Haruki refused to explain the bullying situation he had just experienced in the biology room, and only gave a short answer that he was fine to those who had asked. The 3 bullies who had bullied Haruki in the biology room were Haruki's classmates. They also responded to Haruki's messy appearance, but still said that he was fine. Not to forget, the verbal taunts were also thrown as jokes that were not funny at all. Class was about to start, and a teacher had entered their classroom. Unusually, there was a new figure brought in by the teacher. The figure was a beautiful transfer student, but a man named Yukihime Takashi. He was a transfer student from Tokyo and also an eyewitness to the bullying case that befell Haruki in the biology room some time ago. His classmates were immediately captivated by Yuki's appearance, which looked beautiful yet handsome. Both male and female students in the class were already captivated by Yuki's appearance, especially her face. At the same time, Haruki's eyes widened in shock because he recognized the figure as the person who intervened in the bullying case and acted as his savior. Not only Haruki, but the 3 bullies also noticed and recognized Yuki. While they seemed a little surprised, they also seemed quite happy to have a new target. Like most transfer student introductions, the homeroom teacher who brought Yuki into the classroom asked the students to be friendly and befriend him. That day, there was a physical education class taught by a teacher named Onizuka. The students in the class seemed quite alert as they were about to attend Onizuka-sensei's lesson. It seemed Onizuka-sensei was a strict teacher with his teaching schedule, so all the students hurried to change into their gym uniforms so they wouldn't be late for Onizuka-sensei's class, as the consequences would be quite severe. At that time, Yuki had finished changing his clothes and was ready to go to the field, but his steps were blocked by Takagi and Orihara. The 2 bullies wanted to take out their anger on Yuki, who had disturbed them while bullying Haruki. Haruki came to mediate so that Yuki would not become the next victim, but instead, he received a direct punch from Takagi. The students who witnessed the bullying tried to ignore it and were reluctant to get involved. They were even immediately expelled by Takagi, so they would not interfere with his business. Orihara now grabbed Yuki's hair and pointed a cutter at the young man's neck. He intimidated and threatened Yuki that his actions this morning were quite annoying for them, and if Yuki continued to act like that in the future, they would not stay silent and give Yuki a very bad school life. They showed no mercy at all. When they had finished delivering their message, Takagi and Orihara then left, leaving Yuki and Haruki in the locker room. Yuki then tried to check the door, and sure enough, the 2 of them were trapped inside the locker room. Seeing that they couldn't get out immediately for gym class made Haruki quite scared. If they were late for gym class, the disciplinary action they would receive was hopping like rabbits 10 times around the schoolyard. On the field, Onizuka-sensei had already begun taking attendance of his students. The 3 bullies who were also attending the class seemed very happy to know that Yuki would later carry out the punishment with a body that looked frail. They couldn't wait to see Yuki's desperate look. From inside the locker room, Haruki began to panic because he saw Onizuka-sensei starting to take attendance. Haruki then tried many ways to get out of the room, and now he was going to call the school staff room so they could get out. Just as Haruki picked up his phone, in front of him was Yuki, lifting the lockers in the students' locker room. Of course, Haruki was very surprised by what Yuki would do. Outside on the field, Onizuka-sensei had arrived at Yuki's name, but did not find the student who owned the name. Onizuka-sensei also realized that Haruki was not there. Riona and her group giggled happily when they thought their plan was going smoothly. Suddenly, a locker from the locker room broke through the locker room glass and fell right near Onizuka-sensei and his stew. Dents gathered. Everyone who saw this was certainly shocked, but in this case the perpetrator acted normally. The one who had thrown the locker was Yuki. Haruki was shocked, but he seemed to know what Yuki would do next, but the young man was immediately afraid because at that time they were on the 2nd floor of the school building. Yuki was not afraid or hesitant at all. She was determined to stay down and attend the gym class guided by Onizuka-sensei. Because of the impact, Haruki would not move from his place. Shiryuki then acted and started to lift Haruki, carrying him like a princess, then jumped from the edge of the locker room window down directly to the field. Haruki panicked while Shiryuki managed to land calmly, of course, with Haruki in her arms. Onizuka-sensei looked surprised by the way his two students appeared, while Riona and her friends looked annoyed. Shiryuki immediately confirmed her presence to Onizuka-sensei, followed by Haruki. What Shiryuki did certainly caused a commotion among his friends. Many were amazed, many were shocked. Shiryuki was a transfer student with a handsome face but a posture that looked frail posture. The weak-looking young man had just thrown a clothes locker out of the locker room on the second floor. Not enough, Shiryuki also jumped from the locker room to the field while carrying Haruki. His strength seemed inversely proportional to his physical appearance. How the other students saw Shiryuki made the three bullies who were also there feel reluctant. The three then decided to leave Onizuka-sensei's class, despite Onizuka-sensei's own attempts to prevent it. Shiryuki and Haruki ended up getting punished by walking around the field with a bunny walk. Haruki ended up angry with Shiryuki, while Shiryuki tried to get closer to Haruki. Shiryuki only wanted to help Haruki, but Haruki didn't expect that help at all. Shiryuki's help for Haruki was something that bothered him. He wanted Shiryuki to act politely towards him. Haruki left, leaving Shiryuki still confused and silent. Afterward, Haruki experienced further bullying by Orihara and his gang. The bullies vented their frustration on Shiryuki by abusing Haruki. One of the bullies even intended to carve the words, "I'm a slave," onto Haruki's face with a box cutter. Their actions were accidentally witnessed by several kids from the baseball extracurricular. However, they were reluctant to get involved with the bullying gang, which was already quite well known at school. It wasn't just those two. Shiryuki was also up in the tree, watching them from the start. He saw how the two baseball players seemed reluctant to get involved. The bully gang's track record was disturbing. The victims were shown no mercy, even when they cried, and their hurt wasn't even heard. They continued to torture them under the pretext of punishment until they grew tired of it. Furthermore, several videos of the bullying were even circulated on social media. This meant that none of the bullies were hiding their actions. The abuse perpetrated by Orihara and his gang indirectly claimed lives. The victims suffered chronic psychological problems, leading them to return to God's lap. Many of their victims lacked mental fortitude. That's why they were quite happy with Haruki. Haruki persevered well despite their constant abuse. The outrageous act left no one brave enough to help the victim. Two members of the baseball club chose to leave and not retrieve their equipment, even though it would have meant canceling practice. Shiryuki seemed quite disappointed that no one dared to stand up to the intimidation. The next day at school, the three bullies waited boredly for Haruki's arrival, but it seemed that Haruki was late that day. Since his usual target hadn't arrived yet, they randomly chose another bully target in the classroom. None of them dared to fight back or defend the victim. Even Riona, a girl, didn't dare to fight back. They started thinking about taking their new target to the backyard so they could have more freedom to abuse him. That day's victims struggled against the bullies for forgiveness, but instead of being released, they got worse. Haruki had just arrived at the front door when he saw that the bullying that usually happened to him was now happening to someone else. Haruki remembered his old memory of a similar incident. In the past, Haruki witnessed with his own eyes a classmate being bullied severely. The target at that time whimpered for help, afraid that the bullies would finish him off. Haruki returned at this time. He couldn't bear it, then stopped the bullying and turned it on himself. The bullies seemed happy to see their favorite target had arrived. Haruki was immediately taken to the back to relieve the boredom of the three troublemakers. Shiryuki watched silently. In his mind, he asked why Haruki had to go alone. Shiryuki became curious to know Haruki more deeply. Therefore, Ryuki continued to follow Haruki wherever he went and was taken by the bullies. He knew everything that happened to Haruki. Until one day, Haruki was in the biology room. Haruki was quite calm while feeding the fish in the aquarium in the room. However, his composure was shattered when three of his bullies approached him. The three naughty students thought Haruki was trying to avoid them, but in reality, he wasn't. Riona then became interested in the aquarium's contents. Haruki tried to protect the fish, but Riona became irritated by his behavior. the bullies already knew that the fish in the aquarium were very important to Haruki. Haruki seemed to take very good care of them, and knowing this, they would surely steal the fish from him. This time Haruki spoke up. He begged the man to stop his work, but of course his pleas were meaningless. The bullying resumed. This time Haruki was forced to become a living aquarium for the fish. The decision to keep the fish alive or dead was Haruki's. When Takagi made Haruki into a living aquarium, the other two colleagues laughed and praised his actions, which they considered remarkable. It was only one fish, but Haruki's mouth was already full. There were still two more that Orihara would cram into Haruki soon. Haruki could no longer hold on and ended up vomiting the contents of his mouth. The fish then fell to the floor and was accidentally stepped on by Riona. Riona, disgusted because her shoes were dirty, then wiped her shoes on Haruki's head. Haruki looked terrible, not to mention the aquarium with the remaining fish was also deliberately dropped. Haruki rushed to grab the two fallen fish, hoping they could still be saved. The three bullies seemed happy to see Haruki starting to despair. Once satisfied, they left Haruki and went as they pleased. All of this was witnessed by Shiryuki from behind the window outside. Haruki couldn't save the remaining live fish. He ended up burying them under a tree. Shiryuki was there, asking Haruki if the young man would continue to let the situation continue like this. Haruki remained silent. His sorrow was greater. He still wouldn't change the situation and was willing to be a target as long as no one was killed. Haruki would rather be abused than watch others be beaten and hurt to the bone. It would be better for Haruki if he didn't drag others into his hell. Haruki's desperate words made Shiryuki even more interested in the young man. Shiryuki wanted to know the feelings he was feeling right now when he saw Haruki. His heart was beating so fast. Shiryuki was increasingly immersed in his curiosity about Haruki. He groped for what feelings he actually had for Haruki, until he finally concluded that his feelings might be love. Shiryuki confessed to Haruki that he had fallen in love with the desperate young man. Haruki was increasingly confused by the situation. Just a moment ago, he explained that he didn't want Shiryuki to stop him from making a sacrifice so that no one else would be victimized, but now he suddenly received a confession. Shiryuki wanted Haruki. Haruki was still confused by everything. Finally, Shiryuki asked what if there were no bullies? What if she eliminated their existence? Haruki became interested. He wanted to know if Shiryuki could eliminate them, and Shiryuki confidently agreed that she could. Shiryuki even promised Haruki. Meanwhile, the central bullies gathered. They were in dire straits because they didn't have enough money. Initially, their solution was to ask Haruki to bring them money, but then Riona had the idea to sell Haruki to a perverted old man. They agreed. Riona even planned to find 3 or 4 old male customers at once. Unbeknownst to anyone, Shiryuki was there observing their plans. The next day at school, Takagi, Riona, and Orihara were waiting for Haruki's arrival, but even at lunchtime, Haruki still hadn't arrived. Riona thought that maybe what they did to Haruki yesterday was too much, making the young man commit to return to God. They didn't seem to care because in their minds, the actions they did, such as bullying and abusing others, were very enjoyable, like what they had just done to Haruki yesterday in the biology room. Takagi was even more delighted when he saw Haruki's desperate look. He imagined Haruki begging him to stop. The situation even made him very excited. Takagi wanted to realize their plan to sell Haruki, so that afternoon, he opened a dating app for male lovers to see if any perverts were willing to buy Haruki. Takagi wanted to see Haruki's desperate face screaming from being worked on by his buyer. Not only that, Takagi even wanted to show the site to everyone. Not just Takagi, but also Orihara and Riona. The 3 high school students truly had evil intentions to sell Haruki and enjoy the proceeds. They even placed a vase of flowers on Haruki's table as a symbol of his death. One of the girls was disturbed by the commotion caused by the 3 men. But before she could realize her mistake, Takagi suddenly grabbed her assets and sexually assaulted her. Shiryuki entered the classroom and saw a vase of flowers on Haruki's desk. Takagi then greeted Shiryuki, who had just arrived, while saying that Haruki was dead. Orihara added that the reason why Haruki died was that Shiryuki interfered in their affairs. Haruki was said to have committed return to God because they bullied him too often until Haruki could no longer stand all the mental pressure he received. Shiryuki then calmly asked the 3 people why they bullied Haruki. Takagi then gave a short answer regarding the reason they bullied him was simply because they were bored. Takagi, Orihara and Riona then rushed out of the classroom. But before that, Takagi advised that because Haruki was no longer there, the next target of bullying was Shiryuki. Shiryuki took back a vase of flowers that had been on Haruki's table. He intended to give it to Haruki. Shiryuki looked around for Haruki, and when he arrived in front of the biology room, Shiryuki saw that the figure she was teaching was in the room. Shiryuki was about to go in to approach Haruki, but his intention was cancelled when he saw Haruki's shoulders shaking. From behind, Haruki was seen holding his temple, which was the place where Riona's shoe had landed earlier. The incident seemed to have left a mark and become a trauma for Haruki. Shiryuki decided to go in and ask Haruki if that day he would decide to start skipping school, but what Haruki wanted to do was not like that. He didn't want to waste his precious time skipping school, but Haruki didn't want to enter the same class as Takagi, Orihara, and Riona. Shiryuki then asked Haruki if the young man still remembered the promise Shiryuki had made to Haruki. Haruki looked confused and reluctant to answer, but Shiryuki reminded him again, emphasizing that they had promised that once Shiryuki managed to eliminate Takagi, Orihara, and Riona, they would officially date. After saying this, Shiryuki then told Haruki that he would wait for him in class. Shiryuki brought the flowers that had been in the vase. He placed them on the grave of Haruki's discus fish. Standing in front of the fish's grave, Shiryuki reaffirmed her commitment to Haruki. Elsewhere, Takagi, Orihara, and Riona were gathering for a smoke. Takagi's search led them to find customers willing to buy Haruki. One was a perverted old man who offered 100,000 yen for Haruki. They had found a customer, but what they hadn't seen that day was the creature they were selling Haruki. They were still trying to negotiate a time with the customer. Once they agreed, the three immediately divided up their tasks. The next day, Takagi and Orihara were quite happy to see Haruki already in class since morning. They planned to bring Haruki to their customer that day, but Orihara reminded Takagi that what they were going to do should not be found out by Shiryuki. After school, Haruki was taken by Takagi, Orihara, and Riona to a place. Takagi invited him to play somewhere, but when Haruki asked the reason, Takagi shouted at the young man and threatened to bully Shiryuki if Haruki refused to come along. Haruki was forced to come along. They arrived at a small station. Takagi insisted that Haruki wait. Haruki asked a question, but his question angered Takagi. Haruki received a punch from Takagi, which immediately silenced the young man. He could only wait and do as he was told. Having silenced Haruki, the three of them decided to bring the old man who had bought the clothes to Haruki. Takagi exchanged messages with his customer. From the messages, they learned that the money had been placed in a changing room 500 meters away. Now that they had the key, the next step was to retrieve the money. Takagi received another message that the old man had found Haruki. The next message offered Takagi the chance to watch the old man devour Haruki. The old man admitted he liked being watched while he was performing. He even offered an additional 100,000 yen if Takagi would watch. Takagi considered the offer very lucrative. He didn't intend to tell Orihara and Riona, so he could enjoy the benefits alone. Takagi hurried to the location indicated in the message. The directions led Takagi into a fairly dark alleyway. He was almost there. Takagi was quite enthusiastic. He was excited to see Haruki's facial expression as the old man who bought him worked on it. With his cell phone camera on standby, Takagi immediately opened the door to the room indicated in the message. He was shocked to see the room filled with tattooed men who resembled thugs, or worse, gangsters. One of the tattooed men chased Takagi. Takagi ran as fast as she could to escape and escape the man's pursuit. She didn't have time to get her money. While running away, a hand and a voice guided her somewhere. Without thinking, Takagi followed the directions, even though she didn't know who was behind. The voice and hand. Takagi ran quite far, even entering a forest area. Upon regaining consciousness, Takagi felt nothing but gratitude for escaping the terrifying man's pursuit. However, he was shocked to see a figure in a cloak standing there. Takagi was even more shocked to discover that the cloak was Shiryuki. Takagi thanks Shiryuki. This time, Shiryuki is like a savior for Takagi in a difficult situation. Takagi still doesn't understand what is happening. Shiryuki then speaks and tells Takagi that the forest area they are in this time is very different from Tokyo. The large forest where they are standing this time is very comfortable for Shiryuki. Takagi is confused about what Shiryuki is talking about. Suddenly, Shiryuki hits Takagi with a hammer. Shiryuki continued, explaining that in that place, no one would know what they were doing. They wouldn't have to worry about anyone accidentally seeing them. Takagi tried to stop the bleeding from his nose and mouth. He was confused by what he was experiencing at that moment. Shiryuki continued her actions, this time striking Takagi with the hammer until it impaled him. Takagi, almost unconscious, asked why Shiryuki was abusing him. Of course, Shiryuki happily replied that he did it out of boredom. Shiryuki also verbally abused Takagi, who was beginning to lose consciousness. The young man then retrieved the hammer and resumed his torture. Time passed and the day had changed, and it was already morning. Takagi woke up after all the torture Shiryuki had inflicted. He was greeted by Shiryuki that morning, who said that Takagi's wake-up time was perfect for the preparations Shiryuki had made for him. Takagi was tied by Shiryuki to a tree, with a tree trunk with a conical tip between his legs. Takagi felt so tortured. He screamed and said that he would never forgive Shiryuki. Shiryuki didn't want to hear it. Takagi's chatter was too noisy, even though Haruki was suffering more than Takagi right now. Takagi didn't want to be compared to Haruki. For Takagi, Haruki was a weak man who kept crying over the death of his fish. Takagi just realized that Shiryuki did those things to Takagi solely for Haruki. Takagi began to suspect that Shiryuki had feelings for Haruki. With that suspicion, Takagi then said that Haruki was destroyed. He said this so that Shiryuki would be affected. Takagi even mentioned Haruki's past, where he had experienced sexual harassment from Riona. Shiryuki wanted to know if Takagi was that happy watching Haruki suffer. Takagi confirmed it. He was thrilled to see Haruki begging him and his two other friends to stop their torture. Haruki, while receiving Riona's abuse, kept whining and begging for him to stop, but none of his moans were heard. Shiryuki had had enough of Takagi's ranting. He then explained that the purpose of torture was to instill remorse and psychological damage in the target through manipulation. Seeing Takagi's apparent lack of remorse, Shiryuki gave up. Takagi was beyond repair. Ultimately, Shiryuki chose to send Takagi to hell, believing he would never repent. Shiryuki landed a single blow on Takagi, and the young man immediately screamed in pain. Shiryuki's only regret was that only the animals and trees had heard Takagi's final words. Shiryuki truly wished there was someone who could witness Takagi's end. Takagi knew his end would not be far off. Shiryuki repeated the action as many times as she pleased. Shiryuki had deleted all of Haruki's videos. He had even set up a fingerprint on Takagi's phone. He had seen countless other people's videos, but Shiryuki was only interested in Haruki. Shiryuki was curious and asked what it felt like to be a victim to Takagi. Takagi whimpered and begged to be let go. He promised not to bully Haruki again, but Shiryuki didn't care. Shiryuki asks why he should let Takagi go. He believes a bully should be punished. Another reason Shiryuki doesn't let Takagi go is because if Takagi doesn't disappear, Haruki won't date him. Shiryuki's sentence doesn't get any response from Takagi. Shiryuki wonders why the young man doesn't answer. Upon further inspection, it turns out that Takagi's existence will now disappear completely from the world. It's time for Shiryuki to catch Haruki's other bully. Shiryuki's next target is Riona, the girl who stomped on Haruki's precious fish. There are only 2 more targets left until Shiryuki can date Haruki. At school, Orihara and Riona began searching for Takagi, who never came. Not only that, but even Riona's messages were not read by Takagi. Takagi's disappearance occurred after they planned to sell Haruki, therefore, Haruki became the target again. Orihara approached Haruki to ask about Takagi's whereabouts, but Haruki himself did not know where Takagi had gone. Haruki only remembered that yesterday, Takagi called him to the bathroom and then beat him until he was unconscious. Then after a while, he had to wake up, but Takagi was not around him. Therefore, Haruki decided to go home. After that, he never saw Takagi again. Orihara and Riona did not believe what Haruki had just said and even accused the young man of lying to them. Orihara and Riona demanded that Haruki tell the truth and tell them where Takagi was. While the two still believed Haruki was lying, they overheard other students discussing the sighting of Takagi yesterday. The student who saw Takagi was a student whose house was near the spot where Takagi was chased by the black mob. From this story, they concluded that there must be a connection between what they saw and why Takagi didn't come to school that day. Orihara and Riona exchanged a look of surprise, especially when the student mentioned the black community. They couldn't fathom what Takagi had done. While the two bullies were confused, Shiryuki sat silently watching them from his seat. The beautiful young man smiled when the name of the black community was mentioned. The group's name didn't have a good representation in society, so if Takagi was really gone for a long time, his family and school wouldn't do much or care because of his connection to the black community. Not only that, the forest where Takagi was killed was very large and not many people came to visit, so it wouldn't be easy for Takagi's body to be found. Even if Takagi's body was found, the police would consider the black community the main suspect. Shiryuki, who had successfully eliminated one of Haruki's 3 bullies that day, felt in a very good mood. It was time for class to change. Shiryuki got up to invite Haruki to go to the next class together. At the same time, Orihara and Riona began to wonder what they should do about Takagi's disappearance. Riona couldn't believe what she had just heard, so the only solution Riona could propose to Orihara was to maximize their efforts to find Takagi with their own hands. Before Takagi died, when the dying young man still had a little consciousness, Shiryuki asked Takagi about who Riona was. Takagi, intimidated by Shiryuki, then explained that her Yama Riona was a girl who was still a virgin. That fact was quite impossible to be true, but the fact was clear. Riona was a figure who was very loyal to the name of the person she loved, and that person was her uncle. Takagi told how crazy Riona was regarding things related to her uncle because the girl was very obsessed with the man. Riona even immediately responded to a joke thrown by her friend, who said that a girl could not marry her uncle. The girl who had thrown the tent then became the target of Riona, and not only that, Riona even asked for help from Takagi and Orihara to molest the girl. Takagi had told him everything he knew about Riona. Therefore, he demanded Shiryuki's release, but the beautiful young man only became more convinced that Takagi, Riona, and Orihara were completely incompetent. Back during class, the majority of the students tried to focus on the teacher's explanation. Shiryuki arranged the board with a smile, wondering what she could do from now on. While the class was in session, it didn't stop Riona and Orihara's bullying. The target this time wasn't their classmates, but the teacher who was trying to explain things to the students. The homeroom teacher seemed disturbed by Riona's actions. The man clearly showed a very annoyed face at the girl. Previously, the teacher named Tokieta had intended to report the bullies during a teacher's meeting, but before that was done, Tokieta was first led to a place by Takagi, Orihara, and Riona. They then created an action scenario that showed scenes such as Tokieta trying to harass Riona, but the actual incident was the opposite. When the teacher was harassed, Riona recorded a video of the incident. Now, Tokieta is obedient to Riona, Takagi, and Orihara. When class was over, Riona tried to ask Haruki to hang out with her the next day. Riona asked Haruki on a date. The girl initially acted indifferent when Haruki refused her invitation, but Haruki eventually agreed to the date. It was not without reason. It turned out that Riona asked Haruki on a date so that her goal of selling Haruki to several old men could continue. Riona had become too comfortable torturing Haruki. The girl was increasingly impatient to meet Haruki the next day and sell him to the old man. Haruki was about to leave the classroom, but Shiryuki stopped him and asked if he was going on a date with Riona. Haruki didn't want to make a big deal out of it because no matter what, he would still be a victim in the end. Shiryuki was confused about how Haruki could feel okay being a victim. He also said that the weather had been raining a lot lately, and dating during that season would be a bit annoying. Shiryuki began to wonder. If Haruki wasn't going to be bullied anymore, what kind of face would he show Shiryuki? Class time has ended. Now the students are allowed to go home. The students say goodbye to each her, but at the same time, Haruki is confused as why Shiryuki is still following him. He asks Shiryuki the reason, but Shiryuki answers that it is Haruki himself. The reason why Shiryuki follows Haruki is Haruki. Haruki begins to suspect whether there is a possibility that Shiryuki is genuinely worried about him. Haruki begins to wonder if Shiryuki's words about eliminating the bullies are true. Haruki feels uncertain, especially since they still don't know each other very well. Shiryuki still wanted to go wherever Haruki went, and that afternoon they walked together to Inukai-sensei's office, in the biology room. Shiryuki made small talk, saying that she honestly didn't understand much about biology, but Haruki was confused because the key to the biology room had to be found to open it. Haruki found the situation quite odd, as the biology room door was usually always open. The only possible reason for the lock was that Inukai-sensei wasn't in the office at the time. Haruki gave up looking for the key and intended to return the next day. The young man then left, leaving Sir Yuki alone. As Haruki turned around, Sir Yuki sensed something behind the door. Haruki noticed his shift in focus and asked if something was wrong. Sir Yuki replied that nothing was wrong and then left with Haruki. From behind the door, inside the biology room, Inukai-sensei was actually attempting to hang himself. Elsewhere, Riona was meeting a man. The man seemed attentive to Riona. Riona maintained her attitude of being kind and sweet in front of the man. She even lied that she was close to her teacher at school. The man was Riona's uncle. Hearing Riona's story made the man reminisce a little about his past in high school. Talking about high school life, it would always be about romance. The man asked Riona if she had a crush on someone. Riona answered honestly that there was someone she liked. Riona seemed very happy talking to her uncle. She mentioned that his birthday was coming up soon. Riona explained that she had a part-time job so she could buy him a present this time. Her uncle seemed quite pleased and eagerly awaited his niece's gift. Shortly after, her uncle had to leave on urgent business. The two parted ways and returned to their respective activities. As soon as her uncle left, Riona's expression returned to its original state. She was upset that she couldn't give her uncle a gift that day and spend more time with the man she loved. That evening, as Riona walked home alone, she had already booked a nice hotel room for herself and her uncle. She planned to have dinner with him. Riona was in a desperate rush to sell Haruki as soon as possible to get the money. She was well aware that her uncle liked good girls, so she would never be able to honestly ask where the money to buy him the gift came from. Suddenly, someone grabbed Riona's wrist. It was Sir Yuki. Riona was surprised when Sir Yuki suddenly appeared in front of her. Sir Yuki asked the same thing he had asked Takagi, namely, why Riona bullied Haruki. If Sir Yuki had an assumption that the girl might like Haruki, Riona did not accept it. Where did the assumption come from? Sir Yuki was just guessing because, according to him, there are people who deliberately bully the people they like. Maybe Riona is that type of person, but Riona immediately denied the assumption. Riona will never be able to like Haruki because, according to her, Haruki is not handsome. Sir Yuki tightly gripped Riona's wrist and asked if she would bully Haruki again. Riona didn't answer but instead groaned in pain. Riona began to cry and whimper. She promised not to bother or bully Haruki again from then on. Sir Yuki wanted to make sure Riona would keep her promise. Riona answered briefly. Sir Yuki let go of her wrist and they began to part ways. Sir Yuki once again asked to make sure that Riona didn't like Haruki. When he was sure of the answer he received, Sir Yuki smiled and left. As soon as Sir Yuki was out of sight, Riona changed her attitude again. The girl was just lying. She wouldn't improve her attitude towards Haruki because bullying Haruki was a fun activity for the girl. Riona immediately opened her phone because she knew she was in dire need of money. Not only Haruki, but now Riona intended to sell Sir Yuki too, so that the profits she would get could double. All of this was done to commemorate her uncle's birthday, which had to be special. Riona thought enthusiastically about what gift might be suitable for her to give to her beloved uncle. Suddenly, from behind the bushes, a man appeared and smothered and drugged Riona from behind. Behind the scenes, Sir Yuki could be seen from a distance holding his cell phone. It seemed that the man who had just smothed Riona had obtained information about the girl through Sir Yuki. An unconscious Riona was taken to an empty building and tied to a chair. The man who had smothered and carried her was Inukai-sensei, a teacher who had lost his authority and respect among his students due to the actions of Riona and her friends. Inukai-sensei forcibly woke the unconscious Riona, claiming that students were forbidden from napping in class. Riona then woke up and was shocked to find Inukai-sensei in front of her. The girl was confused as to why she suddenly found herself in this situation. Inukai-sensei shouted and ordered Riona to stop talking because he was about to start his class. According to Inukai-sensei, someone like Riona desperately needed his guidance. Sir Yuki observed the situation from a distance without wanting to get involved. He simply wanted to know how Inukai-sensei would properly educate Riona. Flashback when Haruki tried to open the biology room, but it was locked, and he chose to return the next day. At that time, Sir Yuki realized something and chose not to go home with Haruki and said goodbye with the excuse that the English teacher needed Sir Yuki. He did not forget to add that day, Haruki had to go home alone. Honestly, he had to be alone, never said that he and Shiryuki would go home together. As soon as they parted, Shiryuki tried to see the inside of the biology room from the yard outside the window. He heard a sound coming from inside the room. Shiryuki then picked up a stone and broke the biology room window from the outside so he could get in. When he entered the room, he found Inukai-sensei hanging from the ceiling, but still alive and trying to maintain the rest of his life. Shiryuki was quite curious about what Inukai-sensei was doing in that place alone. Inukai-sensei didn't hear and was still struggling with his life. Shiryuki tried to guess that his homeroom teacher was trying to return to God by himself, but according to Shiryuki, Inukai was too good a person to be thrown away. Shiryuki could tell that Inukai-sensei had never thought of killing himself. The man only thought that he couldn't handle things like bullying because of what they had done to him before now. Shiryuki then approached Inukai-sensei and whispered. Shiryuki offered Inukai-sensei to take revenge first before the girl was truly taken by death. Back to the current timeline. Inukai-sensei, who had been allowed to vent his anger on Riona, no longer hesitated and held back. Riona still tried to avoid and asked for the bonds that wrapped around her body to be released immediately. Riona felt disgusted seeing the contents of her teacher's pants. Inukai-sensei suddenly shouted and discussed the case of a female student in Class B who had committed go to heaven some time ago, and behind the case, it turned out that Riona was also involved. Riona refused to be blamed. The girl felt innocent because the student who jumped from the top of the building was never asked to commit return to God independently. Riona only ever made the girl sleep with herself. After encouraging a girl to sleep with herself, Riona also laughed at the girl's actions, which also killed herself due to psychological damage. Riona laughed happily when she heard and recalled the incident. On the other hand, Inukai-sensei looked confused and wondered why the girl committed acts of bullying her peers. Inukai-sensei was at the peak of his emotions because he felt concerned about the fate of Riona's victim. The teacher felt empathy because he could also feel how much pain he felt when he was the target of bullying by an individual or group. Seeing how Inukai-sensei's face looked when angry made Riona shudder with fear. Inukai-sensei forcibly educates Riona while Shiryuki watches. After the lesson, Shiryuki is quite impressed with Inukai-sensei's extraordinary method of educating Riona. While continuing to stare at his phone, Shiryuki mutters that they need to let those fools who don't understand what it's like to experience pain firsthand. Riona was left alone in the abandoned building, her clothes disheveled. She looked depressed and frustrated, as the virginity she had tried so hard to preserve for her uncle had been forcibly taken. Her gaze was blank until a familiar male voice called her name. Riona was called by her uncle, who came for her. Riona, who saw her uncle coming, immediately ran to the man she loved. However, instead of a warm, comforting hug, Riona received a hard blow and a disgusted look. Her uncle pointed at the phone he was holding. The phone screen displayed a screen with a recording of Riona bullying another girl. Riona was wide-eyed and confused to explain. She didn't know where her uncle got the video. Her uncle only explained that he had just received a DM with the contents of the video from someone. Her uncle didn't expect his cute niece to act so cruelly. Riona tried to explain, but her uncle refused to listen. The uncle even refused to listen to the reasons and felt ashamed of having a relationship with Riona. Her uncle, the man Riona only loved, never wanted to see Riona again. Those words were a huge blow to Riona. The psychological impact she suffered led her to commit return to God, like her former bullying victims. News of Riona's situation had reached the school. Takagi was still missing, and at the same time, Inukai-sensei hadn't come in to teach. They had many questions, but no one answered them. Shiryuki felt at peace. He thought he could now understand people's feelings a little better than before. Haruki was surprised and then tried to call out to Shiryuki. Shiryuki noticed Haruki's presence. He asked Haruki what he needed from her. Haruki was a little suspicious of the previously cheerful Riona's disappearance. Shiryuki responded calmly to his suspicions, praising him for his understanding of others. He also suggested that Riona might regret Haruki's death. Shiryuki then asked if Haruki was happy about the disappearance of the bullies. Haruki didn't immediately confirm it, but the most important thing for him was that no one was hurt. Their class that day began, and Shiryuki started it with a happy feeling because there was only one more bully to get rid of before he could finally go on a date with Haruki and do various fun things together. While Shiryuki thought about the fun things he could do with Haruki, Haruki himself was still drowning in his gloomy feelings, while Orihara in the back seat looked very upset. During the break, Orihara then forcibly took Haruki to ask where Riona was because, from what Orihara knew, Riona had an agenda to date Haruki yesterday. Besides, the last contact with Takagi should also be Haruki. Orihara suspects that Haruki is involved in the disappearance of his two fellow bullies. Haruki is quite afraid of what Orihara will do to him, but he doesn't know anything about the disappearance of the two temple friends. Orihara thought Haruki would be happy if Takagi and Riona disappeared, because it could be assumed that his bullies were no longer there. However, Orihara is still there, and never has any intention of letting go of Haruki forever. That day, Orihara was deeply upset by Takagi's disappearance and Riona's go to hell. The young man began to wonder if his friends had been arrested by someone holding a grudge against them. However, when this assumption arose, Orihara had many people in mind who could have carried out the grudge. He began to think that the perpetrator might have been a victim of bullying they had previously bullied, but even so, this didn't stop Orihara from suppressing his bullying. As Orihara entered the classroom, he overheard several girls discussing Shiryuki's charms. He then remembered that Shiryuki had always hung out with Haruki, and that many strange incidents had occurred since Shiryuki transferred to their school. With this assumption, Orihara had an idea that he thought was quite good. After school, Shiryuki wanted to go home with Haruki, but Haruki reminded him that the paths between their houses were opposite each other. Haruki didn't want to bother Shiryuki even though Shiryuki had volunteered. Coinciding with this, a teacher still had business with Shiryuki, so the young man had to stay at school first. When Shiryuki left with the teacher, that's when Haruki was approached by Orihara. Orihara took Haruki to an empty room and tied him to a chair. Haruki remained silent, but politely asked if Orihara could stop doing this to him. Orihara then replied that just because Takagi and Riona were gone didn't mean she would stop either. Orihara had dedicated himself to harassing Haruki, and even if she were found out, she would try to cover it up. Orihara then knocked Haruki unconscious. After a while, Shiryuki, having just finished dealing with the teacher, was about to go home and grab his shoes from his locker. However, when he opened his locker, Shiryuki found Haruki's cracked glasses along with a note that read, "I'll be waiting in the gym equipment room." Shiryuki complied with the handwritten note and went to the equipment shed to investigate. When the young man opened the door, he was greeted by Orihara, who announced that he had arrived in the torture room and that the seduction show was about to begin. Haruki lay unconscious beneath Orihara. Shiryuki asks Orihara what he's up to. The young man replies that he's aware of Shiryuki's closeness to Haruki, so he thinks that if Hara can defeat Shiryuki in front of Haruki, Haruki will be happy. Orihara expressed his suspicions about Takagi and Riona's disappearance, but he no longer cared. His days were starting to get boring, so Orihara admitted that he needed a new game. The reason the young man discussed this with Shiryuki was that he felt Shiryuki would be perfect for his new game. Orihara then took out a cutter and pointed it in front of Shiryuki, saying that he needed Shiryuki to be able to prove his existence, that Orihara was the king. Haruki seemed to be starting to regain consciousness, and this made Orihara happy because it meant he could torture Shiryuki when Haruki confronted him. But suddenly, Shiryuki took a chair and hit Haruki with it, causing Haruki to faint again. Orihara was very shocked and confused by what Shiryuki did, because he thought that Haruki and Shiryuki were very close friends, but Shiryuki was honestly also confused about their relationship, which would remain the same. He thought that Haruki was more important than him. This confession made Orihara even more confused. It had to be important to Shiryuki. He would get abused by Shiryuki himself. Shiryuki was reluctant to answer, but he only said that Orihara would definitely be in trouble if anyone saw. Shiryuki then approached Orihara and casually asked about any possible date spots. As the two got closer, Shiryuki whispered that Orihara was his final target and that he would do his best to make him enjoy the experience.